So I don't want to like delay us though. So would you like to get started?
Yes.
Okay. So welcome everyone. This is the panel discussion on mentoring and management for diverse planning teams. We would encourage you to use a phone or a separate device to maybe another tab to navigate to mentee.com and enter the code that you should see on the screen. It's 3847309. This will allow you to kind of inspire the panelists and the moderator by answering questions that are related to some of the topics I'll be discussing. Again, the website is menti.com and the code is 3847309. It's in the chat, so please, and on the slides that you'll see. With that, I'm pleased to introduce our moderator, who is the Commissioner of New York City Department of Parks and Recreation and President-elect of AICP, former President of APA, and former Chief Planning Officer and Planning Director for Raleigh, Mitchell Silver.
Thank you, Eileen. We're going to get started. Thank you all for joining us this morning. We'll be discussing mentoring and management for diverse planning teams. Next slide, please. So what is great about the American Planning Association is that we have these really strong code of ethics. And before I do that, I want to introduce our panelists. I'm sorry, you can go back one slide. So our first panelist is Kayla Elson. She is Associate and Lead Planning and Development Practice for Justice and Sustainability Associates, founding board member and active mediator for Community Mediation DC. We have Maxine Griffith, planning consultant for Northeastern University, Columbia University adjunct professor, and distinguished career, including being a board member of the American Planning Association. We have from the West Coast, James Rojas, urban planner, artist, veteran community activists, and also the person who developed Place It. And then we have Samara Swanston, legislative counsel to the Environmental Protection Committee of the New York City Council and professor of planning law at Pratt Institute and Hunter College. Thank you all panelists for being with us. Now, as I was stating, I've always been inspired by the American Planning Association. We have a very strong code of ethics and principles. And as you can see, as we start this conversation, embedded in our principles and ethics is really for us to strive to expand choice and opportunities for all persons, really focused on the needs of disadvantaged groups and persons. We as planners should also contribute time and resources to professional development of students, interns, beginning professionals, and other colleagues. And we should also increase opportunity of members of underrepresented groups. So as I stated, this is really embedded, the idea of really reaching out to our diverse population to ensure we both mentor and offer professional development opportunities. So what we're going to do is focus on both mentorship and creating diverse planning teams. Again, I'm so thankful for all our panelists being here. And with that, we'll start the questions. At the end of the panel questions, we will leave 10 minutes. So at that time, we'll instruct you to put your questions in the chat, and then I will take them and ask them of our panelists. So let's begin. Let's first start with what is the value of having a mentor and how do you find one? Let me first turn to James to see if you have a response. Exactly what is the value of having a mentor?
Well, I think for me, having a mentor in my career has been kind of validating my experiences.
Do you want me to try to get rid of that thing?
Where's my piece of paper with my comments?
So I think, yeah, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so yes, so the value of having a mentor is that can really validate your experiences and really kind of help you navigate your career, whatever form that career might take. For me, working at Metro, being a transportation planner, I switched to kind of art making. So I had to look at the art world for mentors for that moment in time to help me process that kind of new way of thinking about urban planning. So the value of mentoring is really kind of validating your experiences and finding someone with your like-minded interests that can help you navigate your professional career. Thanks.
And Samara, what about you? What is the value of having a mentor and how do you find one?
I didn't have a mentor, and as a result, my career did not progress as well as perhaps it might have. And I did have an experience being a mentor, and I mentored the Pratt student, Megan Houston. She took my environmental law class and my planning law class. She came to me and said, Tamara, I want to go to law school. I took her to lunch and I gave her the guidance about the law school entrance exam that no one ever gave me. I told her it was the most important exam she would ever take, that she should drop the other things she was doing at Pratt and focus on the exam. She scored so well on the exam that she was courted by numerous law schools, offered full tuition scholarship, and she wound up going to Brooklyn Law School on a full tuition scholarship, plus a $5,000 a year stipend. And she's currently the director of the Office of Resiliency in Palm County, Florida. Mentoring matters.
Thank you, Samara. You may want to check with the tech. There is a huge echo, so you may have two devices on. So we'll just make sure when you respond the next time we can get that fixed. All right, I'm now going to go to Kayla. Two of my mentors weren't arranged matches, but I just developed a relationship with them because I highly respected them. In fact, Maxine Griffith, I keep teasing her saying she was a mentor, if not a mentor, a role model. So how common is it to have an informal relationship, and is it a good way, or what is a good way to find a mentor?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's actually a good question, and I resonate with it because I don't know that I've ever actually formally had a mentor. There's never been an official, so to speak, match, as you spoke to. But those who have been in my life really have been informal matches, either based on, my interest in, or admiration, I should say, even of their work, whether it's someone who's kind of directly in my field of work and does a lot of community engagement, consensus building around planning, and is just a high-level person in the field, or it's someone that I resonate with on more of a personal level. There's just a sort of, I want to be where you are type of feeling, and I appreciate your insight on how to get there. And I think it's that sort of initiative and that sort of understanding that sometimes relationships are organic, whether you're in a professional or personal space, that creates the opportunity for mentorships that last, and I think mentorships that can continue to grow. So I think, just being open is a really good way to find a mentor, and taking initiative, I think, as well, just to sum up what I was saying.
My role model or mentor, Maxine, thank you for being here. So I've noticed over time, what are the characteristics of a good mentor? But at the same time, I've had proteges and mentees. Some handle constructive criticism well, some do not. So can you tell us what are the qualities of a good mentor, and what are the characteristics of a good protege or mentee?
Well, obviously, empathy is going to be tremendously important, especially in a formal mentorship, but also energy. Young planners often come to mentor situations, especially formally ones, because they're anxious and because they have concerns about their careers. And young planners often don't have work-life balance. They're trying to start their careers. They're trying to do that in the right way. And I think that the mentor has to match that energy and that concern. It can't be a situation where you remember that you have to check in with your mentee. It really has to be an equal situation. Also, I think it has to be a good mesh between what the mentee expects from the relationship and what the mentor can offer. If the mentee is trying to decide about switching jobs between a number of for instance, transportation planning opportunities, and the mentor has stayed in one agency all of their life in capital budget planning, that may not be a good match. And then finally, as you say, Mitch, actually both sides have to be open to constructive criticism. The mentee, for obvious reasons, but also the mentor if what they're trying to impart, how they're trying to connect with the mentee is not just not working. Has to be open to the mentee, suggesting perhaps we should do it this way. Maybe we need to meet more often. Maybe we can do some stuff by phone. Maybe we can just hang out and have coffee. It may not be, especially if you're a mentor with a lot of experience and you're used to running things, being open to changes in the relationship and in the process are going to be tremendously important.
Kayla, the same question. You're a different spectrum of your career, so can you tell me what's the characteristics of a good mentor and a good mentee?
Sure. I think if I'm thinking about mentors in my life where there was a positive relationship, I think it's a relationship where both the mentor and the mentee are in a collaborative space. So it's a space where, learning, kind of, Maxine, similar to what you were saying, is there's constructiveness, I should say, on both sides, and a willingness to engage in that type of relationship, I think, is important. I also think, in thinking about from a mentee perspective, a willingness to be flexible and a willingness to grow, I think, is important. I think there are, I've seen different relationships in my life where, in my professional life, where folks believe that they have all of the answers. And I think to be in a space where you're a bit capable of being a learner and not always a knower is important as a mentee, and creates opportunity for the unknown. I think when you're early on in your career, sometimes you don't know exactly where you're going or what step to take. And so you just have to be, willing to be in a space where you're learning, willing to be in a space where to take risk, I think, is also important as well when you're thinking about being in that space. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Kayla. So I've learned something throughout my career. We've had good supervisors and bad supervisors. And I've learned that you can learn as much from good supervisors, or I should say lessons from good supervisors as well as bad supervisors. Samara, how would you respond to that? Samara, you're on mute. Okay,
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Okay. First of all, you can learn more from a good supervisor. But no one is guaranteed a good supervisor. But here's what you can learn from a bad supervisor. You can learn how effective they are at judging the political winds. You can learn how well they are succeeding at excluding you, if at all. You can be more successful at predicting environmental disruptions, because that's something that I consider on a regular basis. And also, you can see how they are responding to environmental change. And those are actually good things that you learn from a bad supervisor, because at the end, you live your own life and you have to be accountable to yourself.
What about you? Have you experienced both good and bad? And can you share with us how true whether you can learn lessons from
Sure.
both bad and good supervisors?
I mean, I definitely echo Samara. It's best to have a good supervisor and not a poor supervisor. And I'm thankful for the opportunities where there has been, good supervisors where you feel like you have the structure, you sense that you have support, and you have a place where you're really a part of a team and a solution builder. But I can't say I've always been in that situation. There's definitely been situations where there's been supervisors that I wish things were handled differently, or I don't want to go into characteristics of necessarily personal experience on that sense. But I think if I'm thinking about, what you can learn, I think it's an opportune space to be really reflective on, what type of leader do I want to be, and what type of, when I become in that position of being a supervisor, who do I want to be? What type of communication style do I want to have? What type of values do I want to bring forward as part of a team, as a planner, or as someone in that field? It's just, I think for me, it's been an opportunity to just be that attuned to those types of growth opportunities and where my learning edge is, because sometimes those are best clarified when there is difference and when there is conflict, or when there are spaces where I'm not seeing or hearing or being where I think things ought to be, or where I think situations are handled best. Does that answer the question?
I'm going to go to the next question now, and this is going to be for Maxine, and then James, you're going to be next after this. All of us, and I'm sure some even in this room in this session, when faced with a big hurdle professionally, what were the deciding factors that made you see it through or not see it through? Would a different mentor, manager style have made a difference? Maxine?
Yeah, well, as you know, I came from architecture to planning, and planning is a very different field, even though sort of sister profession. So I had a job with a really great title. My first job at the Department of City Planning. I was Deputy Director of Community Development and Housing Policy. However, when I took the job, I didn't realize that there were going to be 4 layers of management above me, and that every decision I made had to, pass through those 4 layers. And then I also had to work with Corp Counsel, with the city's attorneys. And I just wasn't used to that kind of bureaucracy. In architecture, you may report to the partner in charge, or to a project manager who reports to the partner in charge. But you tend not to have to go through 5 levels, especially with what I thought was a great title. So for the first half of my career, I had moved on maybe every 2 or 3 years. And I was about to move on from this job. I was about to say, I can't be bothered with all of this checking in with people. And I had someone, not a formal mentor, but someone who was my boss's boss. Some of you who worked at Department of City Planning years ago might remember Barbara Weisberg. She was very different than me, an older lady, not a person of color. I was divorced. She was happily married with many children, but we became friends, and she was a supporter. And she took me aside and she told me to calm down and to be patient, and that I was a good planner. I think part of my problem was in switching careers. I was a little insecure and maybe a little defensive about being a city planner. She told me to calm down, that I was a good planner, that I was doing good work. She also gave me some hints about how to deal with the law department. She was married to an attorney, about how to deal with the layers above me, including her. And she said that she thought if I stayed around a bit longer, I would learn more about the profession, and it would stand me in good stead. And finally, she said, you have leadership potential, who knows? And she said it jokingly, one day you might be running a planning department. And indeed, I did get an opportunity to run the Philadelphia planning department and to be a planning commissioner. But Barbara and I were close friends until her passing. And I keep running into people when I tell this story who say, oh yeah, Barbara did that for me too. So that was a hurdle I had to get through, and that was the person that was tremendously helpful, and I'll always be grateful.
Thank you. Work for City Planning. You just brought some incredible memories back, so thank you for sharing, Maxine. So James, same question. Can you talk about a big hurdle professionally, and whether a mentor or manager or someone helped you get through it, or you decided to change direction? You're on mute, James.
For me, my big hurdle came when I decided to leave Metro in LA. I've been working in transportation for probably 15 years, and all of a sudden I decided this was not for me because I'm a very passionate person, and I was trying to be passionate in an agency that just really kind of values, playing by the rules. So I decided to kind of go into the arts and give it my job and give it my professional career and try a different route. And that was 10 years ago, and it's been really successful because I really kind of found my space. In art. So I think sometimes we ourselves, what are we passionate about? Do we really fit into this mold of planning in these different kind of boxes, or do we have to create our own destiny in the planning process? So for me, I've been lucky enough to really use the art world as a leverage to really improve urban planning in different types of community engagement. So it's really asking yourself with the person, what are you passionate about? What are you trying to do? And where do you fit in? So it's important to really think about, who we are as people deeply and just go for it sometimes. Thank you.
James. Samara, this question is for you. Some planners of color believe they did not get the job or the promotion race or ethnic identity. What advice would you give that planner? And you're around me.
Well, I would tell the planner, and the planner should know better than other people, that racism is part of our society. Nevertheless, race or ethnic identity is an extra added bonus for a planner. It's in a field desperately in need of diversity. And most people of color live in cities, and planning is about recognizing and balancing the needs of people who live in densely populated places. So planning has to be representative, and people, planners who don't feel they got their job because of racism need to understand that it's part and parcel of the struggle that we have to better serve communities in densely populated areas.
I'm so tempted to answer this question too. As a supervisor for 30 years, I can't tell you how someone came to me and says, I didn't get the job because of my color, ethnic identity. And I had to pull them aside and tell them, look, here is some of the concerns. Sometimes it's chemistry, you didn't interview well. And so sometimes it's an easy out, but we all want to grow. So I encourage everyone, yes, it can happen sometimes, but always make sure you're on point, do your homework. It's not always the case, but it is something that I do hear quite often. I'm going to go back to you again, Maxine. We're now hearing we want to diversify our planning offices, we want to diversify our offices, and we want to recruit and retain a diverse planning team. Can you tell me, how do you go about that? Is it just about representing or reflecting, or there's something more about how do you create that diverse planning team, particularly now in the 21st century? You're on mute, Maxine.
I'm going to answer this question in part the way I always answer questions like this, and that we need more people of color in the planning profession. And in my view, I don't know that APA or the chapter or any of us really do enough to bring young people to reach out to high schools and undergraduate schools and bring folks in. As a matter of fact, when I talk to especially high school students, they don't even know there is such a profession as urban planning. When you say planning, they might think wedding planner, event planner. As I said before, in part, it's a problem maybe with the name of the profession. But my friend, Jeanette Dinwiddie Moore, who we were on a panel together last week, as you know, Mitch, and she cited the statistics, whereas participation by women has grown tremendously. It's almost 50%. People of color, only 13% of the profession. And this is in a situation where arguably planners impact communities of color tremendously and much more than they do perhaps majority professions. But so having said that, you know, I want to focus a bit on retention. When a young planner comes into an organization or an agency, it seems to me you need to make sure that there's a career path for that person and a plan for that person's promotion and growth, and make sure that folks just aren't hired to increase diversity numbers and then forgotten and put aside. You also need to engage planners in discussions about where they want to be. Not every Black or Latinx planner wants to be a community planner in Harlem or East Harlem. They may be interested in waterfront planning or transportation planning or climate change. So, you know, making sure with that plan of progress that it keys in on what the planner wants to do. And also, you know, taking off on something that you said, Mitch, I think we all need to encourage excellence. There is discrimination, there is bias, and there is subtle racism. And you need to check in with young planners, entry-level planners, to see what's happening. Not just do it at the exit interview on their way out when they've been frustrated, but maybe have a formal structural way at 6 months, at 1 year, at 2 years, to check in with them and make sure that things are going the way they would hope to, and also make sure that they're not harboring a concern about racism, discrimination, or bias that they don't feel comfortable speaking about. And finally, I would say to encourage excellence, as Mitch intimated. You know, and one can do this, especially if you're a friend rather than a manager. You know, if their writing isn't up to par, don't just let them stew in a corner. Take them aside, let them know, and provide a path to encourage them to get better. If presentation skills are not good, and that's why they're not speaking to clients or to the planning commission, again, don't just give them computer work to do. Take them aside and say, this is a way you can improve, and this is a way you can improve your opportunities for promotion. So I have other ideas, but let me stop. I've talked enough.
All right, so Kayla, I'm coming to you next, and I'm going to use an example of what happened very recently in our office. We all know, very traumatic year, COVID, and then the rise of Black Lives Matter. And I did something different with our staff. We had a reflection and allowed just the Black employees to come into a space to talk about how they feel. It was our way of creating a safe space about how they feel about everything that was going on. Those comments brought tears to your eyes. And as a Black commissioner, I felt it was very important to send that message. And at those reflections, you know, we now renamed a couple of our parks, Juneteenth Grove, named a couple of others. So, you know, that's one example of creating that safe space, because a lot of people, as you know, if you're a person of color, you have to check your identity at the door and play this dual role of trying to maintain your professional role, but then you also have an identity. So Kayla, how do you create a workplace that allows all employees to flourish, to feel welcome, and particularly employees of color?
Yeah, I love that you started there with that example, because I think, you know, one of the important elements is to be willing to have the hard conversations. These aren't easy conversations, and to pretend they don't exist or to pretend that the structural or the personal racism isn't evident or operating is a step in the wrong direction. So I think, you know, being able to have those hard conversations, acknowledging people's lived experiences who are on your team, who are in your organization, I think is integral to supporting people flourishing. And also having conversations around what tools are needed to ensure that there's equity in the workplace, to ensure that there's inclusivity. Folks need to be involved, kind of as you indicated, not only in the conversations, but also in the decision making and the solution building and the changes that are going to happen. And I think when you're willing to bring those types of voices into the room, that's when you actually allow and help folks flourish, including folks of color. I think to add to that also, when I'm thinking about now stepping up to, whether you're manager or supervisor or leader in some way, shape, or form, is to be really intentional that, leadership reflects the type of diversity that you want in your organization. I know when I think to, the firm that I work with, Justice and Sustainability Associates, and I compare, our leadership and our makeup to other benchmark organizations, so to speak, or those who do our work, I'm definitely very impressed with our leadership's ability to create a diverse team, to have, African Americans who are leading, women who are primarily in high executive level and middle management. And I think that's because, they want to reflect the values that we have. And I think it's also a willingness to be sensitive to the different lived experiences that come into this space and allow each person to take ownership of what happens in the company and how it operates and what it looks like.
Because I'm looking at the slide of how people hiring diverse leaders is so important. So I'm going to go to you and very quickly, Samara, and then back to Maxine. Is it enough just to hire a diverse leader, or should that diverse leader have the power to make change? It's the difference between representing and reflecting. And if you are a diverse leader, you actually have the power to do something, and you have the support of the organization. So many places hire a chief diversity officer and think it's all on them and not the organization. So Samara, can you respond to that? And Maxie, I'm going to go to you, and then we'll go to our final question.
Yes, it's critically important, but you can't just leave it to the diversity officer. You need to make sure that at the highest levels, people are committed to making sure we have a diverse workplace, and it isn't easy to do. And people have a tendency to feel they got one or they got two. So this is something that I've experienced teaching planning law. Typically, we didn't have any students of color at all. And then we got one or two. So it's not enough to just hire. You need to provide the support. And I would argue that the support should be provided early on when the student enters graduate school, and they should be paired with professors to help develop informal networks. And I think that students should also be given assistance, the financial and emotional support they need to finish their degree. So it's not enough just to hire.
Now, Maxine, you've been in a lot of positions of power, and I know you're not bashful. So can you share your point of view? Because I do get frustrated. A person of color is in power, but they're afraid to make any change. Yeah. But you're in that, and people have expectations of you. So can you talk about, in your experience, how you would answer that question?
Sure. I mean, as lawyers say, I think diverse leadership is necessary but not sufficient to move forward. And depending on where you are and what your position is in leadership, you may have more or less opportunity to hire who you want to. At Columbia University, where I was an EVP, as long as the person matched the position description, I could pretty much hire who I wanted to. On the other hand, at the Philadelphia Planning Commission, I had to go through a whole host of, checks and balances and people and HR concerns before I could hire. On the other hand, I would push back a little bit in that I think every person in leadership has some ability to push, whether it's the ability to persuade, whether it's the fact that they're, as they say in Hamilton, in the room when things are discussed, and when a person's name comes up, you're the person who can say, well, wait a minute. It's true that this person wasn't doing XYZ very well last year, but that person has really moved up and I would like to promote them, or I would like to bring someone in that position that knows that community. So I think the power very much depends on the specifics of the position, and across private and public sector, and whether it's a union job, whether it's a civil service job, etc. But I think every person in leadership has some impact and should be called upon to move the ball forward.
Thank you so much, Maxine. We're going to go to our final question, and we've somewhat touched on this, but I wanted to have Samara, James, and then Kayla respond to this question. What else needs to produce a healthier and more diverse professional and planning work environment?
Well,
Healthier.
well, I believe that we need to start out with internships with planning organizations that are formalized. Diversity and the opportunity of the planning field should be highlighted. So most planners are more specialists, and there are far more opportunities for specialized planning fields today. I think that we need to make planners understand the wide range of opportunities that are in specialized planning fields, so that they can have a choice of how to shape their careers. So there's a lot more that we can do that we're not doing yet, but if we would partner young planners of color with professors who they have an affinity with, starting out early, I think we could get a mentorship going that would be meaningful for planners of color starting out.
James?
I think for me, one of my biggest
You're on mute.
tasks, can you hear me? I think for me, a lot of my work is based on how do you embrace different ways of being in the planning profession. For a lot of Latinos, we grew up in very poor environments, very poor neighborhoods that are kind of do-it-yourself architecture. And a lot of Latinos have a lot of self-doubt about their planning skills because they didn't grow up in a middle-class neighborhood, which embrace our planning policies. They feel that they can't offer the profession any kind of wisdom, but I tell them, because you grew up in this Latino environment, we did it yourself, you're better planners than most middle-class planners. So we have to really kind of remove the self-doubt that people of color might have about their neighborhoods and backgrounds, and really encourage them and really uplift their stories and the creativity to allow the planning profession to really kind of embrace more inclusive actions. Thank you.
Ella, you're going to close us out, and then we're going to go to the audience questions.
Sure. I think I'm going to close us out a bit on a meta level, because when I think about the question of how do you produce healthier, more diverse work environment, I think people see your product first. And I know when we think about, communities of color or other marginalized communities, there is a distrust, I think, sometimes with the planning profession itself. And I think sometimes starting there and being able to change the perception of planning, it's not just a place where you're trying to plan or create cities or communities or regions for some, but if we can create an understanding that, planners come to their position trying to create communities and cities and counties for all, I think that creates a mind shift that has implications, not just outside, externally, what planners do, but inside the work environment to say, yes, this is the type of work that I want to be on board with, because it's something that's for my communities and for me as well. And I see myself as part of those types of solutions. So I think from a meta level perspective, I've appreciated, some of the smaller tuned things, but that's kind of where my mind went with the question.
All right, so we're now going to transition to some of the questions. So I'll give Aileen and Yvette a chance to send me some of those questions. So as we do that, I'm going to tell a very quick story. I know I'm a moderator, but I can't help tell this one because it's one that changed my life. I was applying for jobs. I wasn't getting them. I thought it was because I'm a person of color. I was always number 2, never got the job. On a plane to Savannah, I was going to speak at a conference, and there was this gentleman next to me. I guess he could tell something was wrong. And I told him what happened. He happened to be head of an executive search firm. He says, let me just evaluate you, look at your resume, let me get back to you. He did that. I did this whole assessment of 200 questions, called me back in his office. And then as he looked at me, he said, I have a question for you. He says, are you dead? And I'm like, what kind of question is that? What do you mean, am I dead? He says, I just need to know if you're dead. And I said, why? He says, because your resume looks like an obituary. It talks about you're dead and here are all the things you've done in your life. Your cover letter and your resume needs to talk about not what you've done, but what you can do. Come into that job, tell them, if you hire me, this is what I've done, but this is what I can do. I have to say that changed my life. The next job I applied for was playing director in Raleigh. And they told me that when I interviewed and they saw that resume, I was not only the favorite, but a clear favorite. So that's one lesson I leave to all of you. Just go back, take a look, and to see whether you're actually promoting yourself while they're on a current job, but keep track. That planning project you worked on, it's not just, I did a land use plan. How did you change lives? How did you change the economy? How did you heal the community? Just make sure you understand that so you as a planner offer value and you communicate that to the person that's hiring you. So that's my quick lesson. So now, thank you. Let us now move to the questions. How should direct messages? Here we go. How do we push for paid internships? I'll just open this up to all the panelists. How do you push for paid internships? Maxine, you want to take that on?
Well, I was just thinking.
Oh, I don't know if you're on mute.
I was just thinking that it depends. It depends on your position. If you work for a manager or city manager where there's a yearly budget, that get on that budget train, develop a rationale for why this is a good thing. And the rationale should not just be it's good for the soul, but also how it's good for the city or the organization or the entity that you're working in. Frankly, you're getting a lot of really great mind power for not as much money as you'd have to pay a full-time employee. So I would say it depends a lot on where you are in the hierarchy, but a key is not just focusing how good it is for the community and the interns themselves, but how it can benefit the organization.
All right, Kayla, this question is going to be for you. What advice do you give to a first-time mentor who may be feeling hesitant to be one? And when do you know you're ready to be a mentor? Is there such a thing?
I think as someone who is probably more of an anxious person, I don't know if I ever feel ready for much. I think sometimes there's just an ability to jump in. So I think from the perspective of a mentor, I think as long as you recognize that you're human and that you can kind of bring that sort of, you know, I've had experiences and I simply want to impart those types of experiences and impart learning on another person, then you're ready. I think when you're in, as long as you're in a space of, you know, this is just what I desire, and I actually have some experiences that I can build on. I don't know that there's a, you know, I don't think you have to be 30 or 40 or 50. Like, I don't know that there's an age or a number of experiences that can just make you ready to be a mentor. I think it's just the willingness to say, I care about this other person and I want to support this other person in X, Y, and Z ways.
As planner mentors of color, how do you strike a balance between teaching younger planners, younger professionals, how to play the game to succeed in a white dominant field, and at the same time not perpetuate colonized thinking and ensure that younger planners are true to their ancestors and heritage?
Yeah, I think as planners, like myself, we have to learn how to play the game in order to change it. You know, and I think that's the strategy I use. You know, how do you change this game that we play? and how to really kind of bring in ourselves into this whole forefront. But we need to know how to do it. I think that's one of the biggest challenges is really learning how to play the game and making the changes happen, from zoning to all the different transportation, all the different policies, but really being sure about yourself as a person of color and what your motivations are and what you're offering the applying profession, to help make this change happen. Therefore, the change can happen on everybody's terms. And that's the way to make change happen in this kind of arena.
All right, Samara, this question's for you. What should white mentors be mindful of when mentoring formally or informally early career planners or planning students of color? That's a tough question.
That is a tough question, but I think white mentors need to interact with mentees of color in a way that respects them and and helps them, but at the same time recognizes that they come from a different place and have a different experience. So it may be a little challenging to do, but if you just approach them as friends, even younger siblings, I think you can have a good relationship with young planners. So race is not supposed to matter. So I think that if white mentors understand this, they can have good, productive relationships with mentees of color.
Maxine, I'm going to ask you the same question. How do white mentors be mindful when mentoring of helping students of color?
Oh, you tricked me. Well, first thing, when you say planners of color, that covers a very wide spectrum. And are you talking about a Latinx planner with a Mexican American background? Are you talking about a Caribbean American planner from Brooklyn? So I think knowing a bit about the person's background is important. I don't think you should come to these because, race and ethnicity do matter. And I think you should come to the relationship with somewhat of an understanding of the person's background, of the history of that person's folks in the United States, and also what those communities have as special concerns, while still, keeping in mind that everyone is an individual, and that, two people with the same background are going to come to the table perhaps with very different interests. But I think it's important that we do have mentors or supporters of, in a range of situations, because that's the America we're working in.
Right, now this is a long question. Let me summarize. And this is open to anyone who wants to respond. We're planning in a white majority profession, and they recognize, all the planning tools that are out there. But a planner is dealing with a lot of issues. They mentioned, Maxine, you talked about retention, but they're very concerned about the systematic racism, the sexual harassment, the bias, the daily microaggressions. How do they deal with this? Where do they report it in this environment? If we truly want to retain someone, the daily microaggressions, we all know, is a challenge. So anybody wants to respond to how do we tackle these problems? This goes to the question of retaining employees when they feel that they're not comfortable or welcome in the planning office or planning environment.
Well, I'm gonna mention a comment that James said, which is we have to be part of the game to change the game. And I think every organization or firm or agency has to have a structure so that you can, without prejudice, report instances of discrimination, bias, racism, etc. In some places, it's going to be an HR department. In others, there'll be a separate committee or commission. And others, it might be an individual. And really, that has to be built into the structure of the organization. I would also say that, it may be a little controversial, but not every planner is meant to be a planner in a government agency or entity. Some may choose an advocacy route, working for community-based organizations, working for organizations that are particularly focused on justice and equity issues. Some folks are really not meant to be part of the game. And knowing where you are on that continuum may take a bit, but it's going to be very important, I think, to not only the progress of an individual, but the progress of people of color in the profession.
You're muted.
You may be on
You're muted. Sorry.
One other panelist to see if they want to answer that question. If not, I'm going to move on to another question. Okay.
I think the only
Go ahead, Kayla.
No, I think the only piece I would add in thinking about the realities of microaggressions and discrimination is, trying to create ways outside of reporting mechanisms to actually handle those types of situations. Because I think the reality is there's a lot of fear around retaliation, and I think there's a lot of validity to some of the reality of retaliation. And so, thinking outside of the box, I think is, longer term, the solution is it's reporting right now, and what other things can be in place that are more supportive when those types of instances do arise.
Right, and I'm going to go to the next question, but one of the things we've done here at Parks is that from the top, I let them know I have little tolerance for that behavior, period, and we communicate that to all of our managers. We have a diversity summit every year. We have people share experiences, but we have zero tolerance, whether it's sexual harassment, bias, all of the above, and we make sure that we understand it. And when the instance does come up, we vigorously discipline on those matters so that people know that they're working in a safe space and they are free to report it without fear of retaliation. But that has to come from the top and sent down to all the employees. There's now a question about teenagers. Based on your experiences, how would you engage teenagers on the concept of planning? James, I had a feeling you were going to answer that one.
I do a lot of work with high school students, and I engage them through the built environments because teenagers know their landscapes, their neighborhoods better than anybody else because they walk it, they live it every day, and that is their life. So having them understand that environment and put a value to it really gets them interested in architecture and planning. Because all of a sudden, you might be buying, from a corner from a street vendor every day in your neighborhood, but you just do it automatically. But once you talk about that, you put a value on it, then you realize how important that vendor might be in your neighborhood. So then now you're changing the way you're thinking. Now you're putting a value to the way they live, and you start to think about your neighborhood in a really different context. So really thinking, but I think using their sensory-based experiences is a great way to get teenagers involved in planning.
Maxine, I know you mentioned it earlier. You talk about how do you get them excited and really interested in planning something, of course, they've never heard of before for the most part.
Yeah, well, as a physical planner, I'm down with James's comment. People may not know what planning is, but they know what their neighborhood is. They know that they either can go to the corner store to get a quart of milk when they need it, or they can't, or they have to get in a car and go somewhere. And linking those real life issues to the fact that someone made that decision. Someone allowed the zoning so that bodega could be there. Someone didn't allow the zoning so that you can't get an apartment in some cities in Jersey. You have to buy a house. So I would say, linking the reality of day-to-day life with the planning decisions and the planners and the planning commissions that made that decision that impacts your life, and getting them excited about changing that paradigm if they don't like it, or enhancing it if they do, is one way to approach it.
Yeah, and let me just add, this is something that I've been speaking on very recently. We noticed a couple of years ago that there was a sign in our parks like saying you couldn't loiter. It said no loitering. And that could be a very dangerous label or rule to have, because the word loitering means that to wait idly by with no apparent purpose. That's what you do in a park. And to have that term loitering can be used to say, I'm not sure I like you standing around, young people in a park. So Parks did his project in the Bronx, just ended earlier this year, called the Yes Loitering Project, and reached out to teenagers to show how they're not welcomed in public space. And so I think that's yet another way, really tangible project. We used public art. The project was in the Bronx. It was an art installation. And so they didn't understand. Now, the good news is in 2017, we removed the rule of no loitering in parks. So everybody, you can loiter in parks. You can just sit there and do nothing. We want you to be there because it's great for your mental health. So it's something we have to really think outside the box to really engage our teenagers, because they don't feel comfortable or welcome in public space. To me, that's truly being inclusive. I'm going to take one last question. Oh, we're basically almost out of time. So if any of you have any quick final comments in 30 seconds, I'll go around. I'll start with you, Samara, and then we'll just quickly go and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you, Mitch. Well, for me, I've been teaching planning for 10 years, and the need for a more inclusive planning environment can't be stressed enough. But it's more than teaching it. We have to be partners with the communities. At Pratt, we have all these internships with communities. So if we don't partner with and work with communities, we lose the opportunity to stay relevant. That's one of the things we do. And so that's one of the things I think is important. And I also think it's important for young people to understand that to change society, you have to be part of the solution. And whether it's teenagers or older people, you need to be part of the solution.
Thank you. James, 30 seconds. Looks like you're on mute.
People's lived experiences as part of our plan.
Thank you. And then let's go to Kayla.
I think just echoing what's been said is I've appreciated the focus on diversity, and I think we've indicated that diversity sits alongside inclusivity, aside equity, and aside justice. And it's when those are taken together that I think we have an opportunity for forward movement. And also just thank you for this opportunity.
The final comment, Maxine.
Well, I think I want to thank Tiffany Ann Taylor. Tiffany, as you know, is one of the co-founders of Hindsight. What you might not know is she was my mentee. And she was the mentee who taught me how to be a mentor. If you know Tiffany, you know she didn't really need a mentor, but she took me on and trained me up to be the mentor I am today. So I want to thank Tiffany for her great work in helping to bring this conference to fruition.
Well, I want to thank all the panelists, Maxine, James, Kayla, Samara, and then all those behind the scenes, Aileen and Yvette. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this session, and I hope to see you in the other sessions throughout the day. Thank you all for participating. We certainly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks.